So, Dr. Stromberg, with the situation that Dr. Gasberry just described, how can a cattle producer decide or determine if his deworming program is effective?
We actually are using what's called the fecal egg count reduction test.
And so, if you'll pardon me for just a minute, when you say fecals, what if I don't know what you're talking about?
When we talk about fecals, I'm referring to a fecal examination, where we collect a fecal sample and then process it and collect the eggs out of it. And we would then treat the animal with their anthelmintic, so we know where they started. 14 days later, we'd collect another fecal sample and run the two numbers. And the general rule of thumb is if it's less than 90%, we're saying that the drug is not as effective as it should be. Statistically, Dr. Gasberry has shown that 20 fecal samples, which means if you have a herd of 20, you sample all of them.
Okay.
If you have a herd of 2,000, you sample 20. The other part of that is that it's an important thing to collect enough fecal sample. And that means what we usually say is to use a Ziploc bag, grab a sample and something that's about the size of a golf ball. Refrigerate them overnight, send them to the lab with 1 day or 2 day turnaround delivery service.
Okay.
Make sure that you send them to the same lab so that the samples are being run in a compatible manner. And then you do the same thing 14 days later. Then we look at before and after. And the difference will tell us how successful were we in removing parasite.
And the last question, so I've done my fecal egg count reduction test. What do I do if I didn't get the results that I wanted, if I'm less than 90% effective?
Well, it's time to re-examine your deworming program. That can be anywhere from, how are you dosing? Is it based on an average weight where you're underdosing half the animals? Are you estimating weights which have been shown to always be or almost always be under the actual weights? If you've done everything correctly, then the question gets to be, is that compound isn't working for you. So I would suggest that at that point we would look at using a different class of dewormer, whatever you might have used. As was mentioned earlier, that could be an endecticide ivermectin type compound to a benzimidazole or even one of the imidazothiazoles.
Okay, so it's important that not only do I look at what the dewormer did, but I look at how I'm dosing those cattle. I look at the weights as I'm trying to estimate what those cattle weigh. And then if I find my dewormer's not effective, it's important to rotate out of a class. So I don't want to go from one ivermectin to another one just because it has a different trade name.
Absolutely. And the other way to do that is it's very difficult to do that on your own as a producer. And at that point is when you either go out and you bring in your veterinarian or one of the extension agents or a supply person from one of the pharmaceutical companies can help as well.
Looks like we've got some cattle to get worked here and dewormed, but before we get to that, Dr. Newcomb, tell us about the different dewormers and how they vary.
Sure, Ron. There are basically 3 different classes of dewormers. First class is the macrocytic lactones, or what most producers know as the ivermectins. The 2 most common forms of the ivermectins are the injectables and the porons. You know, their particular strengths are they're good on the external parasites, the flies and the lice, and also good on the stomach worms. The next class is the benzimidazoles, of which Safeguard is the market leader. Several different formulations that you can do. You can do drench or paste if you're doing it chute side feed formulations. The particular strengths besides the application methods are they're very good against the intestinal parasites. And the last group are the imidazothiazoles, which is an older group of compounds that's not used very much anymore today, but it's still an important compound or family of compounds to keep around in case the efficacy of our other classes slip.
Thank you, Dr. Newcomb. We're going to move out of the way and let these guys deworm some cattle.